Hello and welcome to our software tutorial series. In this tutorial, we will continue to complete the main information sheet by entering the taxpayer's exemptions in the tax preparation software. In this tutorial, you will learn how to enter exemptions on the main information sheet, enter dependent information on the main information sheet, and add an additional dependent worksheet to a return. Exemptions reduce your adjusted gross income. Generally, you can deduct $3,700 for each exemption you claim in 2011. There are two types of exemptions. These are personal exemptions and exemptions for dependents. While the amounts are the same, different rules apply to each type. You are generally allowed one exemption for yourself, and if you are married, one exemption for your spouse. These are called personal exemptions. You can take an exemption for each of your dependents that were alive for some part of the tax year. This includes a baby born during the tax year and a person who died during the tax year. There are various tests that must be met to be able to claim a personal or dependent exemption. See Form 1040 Instructions or IRS Publication 501 for more information. The software calculates the personal exemptions based on the filing status entered on the main information sheet. Your exemptions also depend on whether you selected any of the boxes that state that you or your spouse can be claimed as a dependent on another person's return. In this example, the filing status is married filing jointly, and no one else can claim the taxpayer or spouse as a dependent. This allows them to claim two personal exemptions. The software calculates these in boxes 6A and 6B. In the software, dependents and non-dependents who qualify for Earned Income Credit or credit for dependent care expenses are listed in the Dependent-Non-Dependent section of the main information sheet. If there are more than 4 dependents to list, the first 4 are entered on the main information sheet. The remaining dependents will be listed on the Additional Dependents worksheet. It's recommended that entry of dependent information begins by listing the youngest children on the main information sheet to allow the selection of the dependent care and EIC checkboxes for any dependents who are qualifying children for those credits. We'll now enter dependent information, starting with the first dependent's first name. The information will automatically transfer to Form 1040 or 1040A. Dependent last names will default to the last name of the taxpayer. If a dependent's last name is the same as a taxpayer's, this field can be left blank. Otherwise, enter the dependent's last name. We'll enter the birth date in the Date of Birth field. The birth date is verified by the IRS in certain circumstances. Use the 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and 4-digit year format. The software enters the slashes automatically. The Social Security number for the dependent is entered in the Social Security number field. The software will enter the hyphens automatically. Next, we will enter the dependent's relationship to the taxpayer. We can press the spacebar or click the arrow for a drop-down list. The options provided on the list are based on IRS allowed responses for this field. We'll select the correct response for this dependent from that list. Next, we'll select the number of months the dependent lived with the taxpayer. This can be either a number 0 through 12. Select MX if the dependent lived in Mexico, or CN if the dependent lived in Canada. Next, select the number from the code drop-down list to indicate the relationship of the dependent to the taxpayer. If the dependent child lived with the taxpayer, select 1. Code 2 means that the dependent child did not live with the taxpayer due to divorce or separation. Code 3 should be selected for all other dependents, which would include a parent. If the child is not the taxpayer's dependent, select Code 0. If the child qualifies for dependent care credit, select the Dependent Care or DC checkbox for the qualifying child or children. Otherwise, the software does not calculate the dependent care credit. The software carries the dependent name and Social Security number to Form 2441 or Schedule 2. If you believe that the taxpayer may qualify for the Earned Income Credit, select the EIC checkbox for each qualifying child. This information carries to Schedule EIC. The Child Tax Credit or CTC checkbox is selected automatically if the child qualifies based on age, relationship, residence, and valid Social Security number. To enter the information for the next 3 dependents, the same steps would be followed as with the first dependent. To enter information for the 5th dependent, we first click on 1040 page 1 in the Forms tree. In the Dependents Information section, we right-click in the first dependent entry and select Link to open the Entry Links dialog box. We now add the additional dependent statement by selecting it under Create Link to a new form and click OK. Most of the information is entered on this statement just as it would be entered on the main information sheet. There are, however, some slight differences. Non-dependents must be listed on the main information sheet. Non-dependents cannot be listed on the additional dependent statement. The information for the first 4 dependents is carried to the statement from the main information sheet. Be careful not to delete this information. We will select the first blank line to begin entering the 5th dependent's information. The dependent's last name must be entered on this statement, even if it is the same as the last name of the taxpayer. The software will calculate the name code in the next column. The name code is used by the IRS for verification purposes. The remaining entries for this dependent, and any other additional dependents, are entered just as they would be on the main information sheet. Now let's look at the dependent's total information on the main information sheet. This information shows below the dependent's information entries. The software calculates the totals from the dependent information you have entered on both the main information sheet and the additional dependent statement. The software calculates the total dependents that lived with, did not live with, and other dependents on lines 6C1, 6C2, and 6C3. The software calculates the total number of exemptions claimed in box 6D. This includes both personal and dependent exemptions. This number, along with all the information for each person, is calculated to Form 1040. A non-custodial parent who is claiming a child that does not live with them must attach to the tax return, or Form 8453 if e-filing, a written document that substantiates their right to claim this dependent. If this was the case, the number 2 would be selected as the dependent code, and the software would make the checkboxes in the non-custodial parents section required or red. If this was the case, one of the checkboxes would need to be selected based on the item being attached to that return, or Form 8453 if e-filing. Possible items include a copy of a pre-1985 divorce or separation agreement, a copy of a post-1984 divorce or separation agreement without conditions, or Form 8332 release of claim of exemption. You should now be able to enter dependent information on the main information sheet, add an additional dependent statement to a return, and correctly determine the number of exemptions a taxpayer can claim. Thank you for viewing this tutorial.